Greetings, Craddock here. We're going to be looking over the Legacy of Dreams Cold Twister solo push build. Now this particular build, I'm not necessarily looking to bring you a build that's a meta focus here, and indeed, I did not even have time to test many of the mechanics on PTR related to Twister that could potentially give us an advantage, be it Arcane Dynamo, Arcane Attunement, Reverse Archon even. You could possibly even stack a lot more area damage and adjust your playstyle, and that might result in a slightly higher clear. What I wanted to put forth here was basically what I tested on PTR, and it actually felt insanely good, insanely fun to play, especially for those lower paragons. It felt really good without having the higher augments to run something like this, and I just think that for most players, focusing on these aspects rather than area damage, rather than trying to do something more complicated in a solo push scenario, will make it easier to push with, easier to fish to get that nice rift for, and you'll just have a more enjoyable time playing with this sort of build. Okay, so, right, Craddock, so what sort of adjustments have I made to make the build a little bit more comfortable, even considering still that we're going to be doing a lot of corner stacking with this build with our twisters to deal in the increased damage, right? Because I know a lot of players, they don't like that corner stacking, but I'm here to tell you that with this build, it was actually okay. It felt okay and quite enjoyable to, especially with the Twisted Sword now stacking up to 5 times. It felt really good. Now, something with this guide as well before I get going here is that I have gone over a lot of the mechanics in my solo speed guide, and I put out a full guide for that build, so I will ask you if you want to know a little bit more about these specific things to look into that particular guide, because I go a little bit more in detail than I'm going to here. I'm going to try to point out more of the differences for the solo push build here. Now, one of the things that makes this build super fun to play is the increased attack speed. So I'm dropping a lot of area damage with this configuration, and we're going increased attack speed on the weapon, the ring, and the glove, and the enchantress. So what this gets you is you're able to hit a specific breakpoint with the 1.9 attacks per second that you can actually manually cast your twisters quite a lot more often. And let's show it here. So we're at the 31 FPA breakpoint, whereas if we didn't have this attack speed, we'd be all the way up at 38 frames. So that saves you 7 frames, right? And then you also have the 2 frames that we get from activating our Arcane Torrent a little bit quicker. This is somewhere in the range of 26%. If you average out the fact that twisters are ticking kind of randomly, and the fact that you're activating your Death Wish and Etched Sigil bonuses a little bit quicker, considering that this particular build allows you a lot more uptime with your squirts. So a lot of benefits here with the increased attack speed, especially since we're stacking our twisters against a corner, against a wall per se, and against the environment more often. I kind of feel like having the increased attack speed in preparation, and this is something that I didn't even practice in my solo push. How I was playing was channeling 1-to-1, so I would use my Etched Sigil to release a twister, an auto-proc twister, once, and then I would manually cast once in between that, and I would kind of like just have this cadence, 1-to-1, which allowed a lot of uptime, as mentioned, for the Death Wish and Etched Sigil bonuses, but I kind of feel like in an optimal scenario, if I was paying more attention, I could have stacked my twisters a little bit higher before the Convention of Elements was coming around to the cold cycle. So if I was paying more attention to that, maybe I could have used my increased attack speed perhaps to sacrifice a little bit of damage before this phase to stack up my twisters a little bit more and then do even more damage than was shown in the video. So one other possibility that we could run is drop Stricken in favor of Taeguk. Taeguk would give us a large additive damage increase that would give us somewhere in the range of 43% overall DPS increase during the rift. That's at least 2 greater rifts increase, maybe a little bit more. And this could be hugely advantageous for just clearing higher. However, that being said, the Stricken is so much better for rift fishing. So if you happen to get like an insanely good map, but you get a bad single target Rift Guardian and no power pylon, Taeguk will perform much worse than the Stricken will against that Rift Guardian. So this protects you against those bad Rift Guardians that you might get in the end of the Rift a lot better. You're going to have to fish a lot more to get that perfect Rift Guardian, and you might sacrifice in doing that with the Taeguk some really good maps. So the advantage there is kind of questionable, but I want to mention it because on paper at least it does show a DPS increase in certain scenario. So let's talk about that. So Stricken, I managed to kill the Rift Guardian on my 132 with a power pylon and an Oculus spawn that was fairly favorable in 1 minute and 4 seconds. Now that's insanely fast, I think, but it gives us a good benchmark as to what we would expect without the Stricken. You can sort of calculate that this would take with Taeguk a lot longer, because in those 34 seconds that we stacked up Stricken, we pretty much doubled our damage and then some, a lot more, 2.5 times multiplier almost, with just stacking up the Stricken, and the 25% extra damage that you get against the Rift Guardian from this gem is a really, really big increase. So when you calculate that, it'd be somewhere in the range of 3.5 minutes to clear that same Rift Guardian, even with a power pylon for the Taeguk. And when you think of it that way, Taeguk then would require a power pylon on the Rift Guardian, in addition to requiring a Rift Guardian with ads, because you would need, at that point, a Rift Guardian with an Oculus ring spawn. Ring spawns would be more favorable for the Taeguk configuration because you wouldn't be losing Stricken stacks against the ads that spawn. So that's something to consider, is that this would be more advantageous for that type of Rift Guardian that it is favoring. However, it would require that type of Rift Guardian and a power pylon. So it's an insane fish that if you want to attempt, I want to mention it because it could be a lot of fun, but at the same time, you could be hugely disappointed and not clear as fast as you would, or high as you would, with a Stricken. So basically, we cleared in about 3.5 minutes. That's about 2.5 minutes more, which is about a little bit more than 1 greater rift's worth of potential increase. So it's overall 2 greater rifts, a little bit more than 2 greater rifts worth increase from the gem itself, the additive damage increase, but it's about 1 greater rift's worth more time spent on the Rift Guardian. But because of the toughness that Taeguk allows, the 20% armor that stacks up here, we're able to sustain a similar level of toughness compared to the other builds that I've mentioned, and still slot a more offensive passive. We're running Elemental Exposure here, probably the best offensive passive you can place. Notably, a little bit harder to gear up because you're going to want either an Arcane or a Lightning base damage Death Wish worn. This will give you an extra stack of Elemental Exposure. You'll be able to sustain an average of about 3 stacks from the Flame Ward, the Mistral Breeze, and then the Arcane would preferably be on the Death Wish, and then the Lightning from your Power of the Storm. So this would stack up 4 times on a Rift Guardian, but otherwise 3 times during the Rift, right? So still a lot of benefit because this is multiplicative, getting up to about 21.5% at max stacks advantage there. So I think when you combine these two, it's still an overall potential of 2 greater rifts worth, about 2 greater rifts worth of increase when you're running this particular configuration. It's just getting those rifts is going to be so much harder. It hurts my head to think of it, but yeah. So, but it's something I want to try out, so I thought I'd mention it. And if you want to try it out as well, that's, yeah, up to you. You don't necessarily have to corner stack. It's really enjoyable, in fact, to go through the rift and sort of kite enemies to like alcoves as well. So you can corner stack, you can run them to alcoves, and then kiting enemies just using casting the twister out into the open was useful for kiting them back to pylons. So if you had a nice power pylon or a conduit pylon that was well positioned, that method you can use as well. But most of the time you're going to want to corner stack if you know there's a good corner stacking point nearby. And anyway, it's just a super fun build. I kind of feel like there's a lot more optimizations that can be had here, even with this version of the build. So the attack speed was one thing, and quick reminder, we're hitting the 1.818 attacks per second here, as shown in the Breakpoint chart, to optimize our Etched Sigil, because Etched Sigil by default does not cast every second, and it's only a few frames, but a few frames can cost you 10% DPS, you know, and getting those twisters out is going to be so important for stacking up now. I kind of feel like this is a good configuration. I do have a lower Paragon configuration that I have set up for the 1.54 to 1.6. One of the other things that I enjoy about this configuration is it's really tanky compared to our solo speed configuration, even still, because we're stacking even more life percent, even more vitality in the solo push variation. We're running the amethyst in the helmet instead of the topaz. We still run resource cost reduction on the shoulder piece, but this will give us that 46% life. Armor also going to be a very big component of scaling up our stone gauntlets, so remember to put that armor roll on the chest piece, on the, you know, the belt, the pants, the boots. Roll all resistance by default. The reason we're stacking up all of this extra vitality and even investing a little bit more as compared to the solo speed build in vitality here, amethysts in the chest and pants, of course, is to scale up our life pool. So we have 1.8 million. Especially with equipping the Ashnagar's Blood Bracer, this will be amazing, right? So doubling our shields here as compared to the solo speed build. We're still running Galvanizing Ward, and of course we're going to be running Magic Whip and Deflection as well. Another nice little synergy here is that the increased attack speed does slightly increase your attack speed of Arcane Torrent, so this will stack up your deflection just that slight bit quicker. Very nice indeed. And yeah, it's just a well-rounded, defensible configuration. We also have the Flame Ward, the Mantle of Channeling for toughness. Again, we're using the Unity and the Halo of Carini. Remember to proc at range. Resource cost reductions coming in with Power of the Storm and Herg Brushes. I mentioned a lot of this in the Solo Speed Guide, so I'm not going to go too into that, but those are there as well. Safe Passage is going to be a big component of this build as compared to the solo speed, because you can teleport against the wall where you have corner stacked. So every couple of seconds, basically what's going to happen is when you choose a corner stacking point, we need all this extra toughness and shielding to be able to keep up the squirts, because we're standing still. We're like a sitting duck, right? And basically you're taking so much damage that your illusionist will proc and allow you to recast your safe passage every 5 seconds. So this is something you will want to do, to remember to keep up, to cast it right before your Convention of Elements cycle as well, just to make sure that your squirts stays active. The Aquila and Resource going to be a large component in keeping this toughness up, which will support our squirts. Now, we don't have as much resource cost reduction as we do in the solo speed build, but you have the same maximum arcane power pool, and we have the same arcane power and crit. So what we're going to be doing in the solo push variation is just leveraging that APOC a little bit more and fighting in density a little bit more often, so that our Aquila and Resource won't drop quite as often. In this way, we will keep up our toughness and support our squirts, even in those times where we're fighting difficult mob types, or we've found a point in the map where there are multiple elites perhaps kind of pounding on us. So for passives, Blur in general is going to be one of the best options, increasing our toughness, especially at those lower paragons. I'm going to recommend this. So anything around 1,500 paragon and below, you're going to want to seek out this passive, increasing your base level of damage reduction, which increases that toughness all the much more to keep up your score. It's going to be hugely advantageous as an option, I think. Now, once you get a little bit more up in paragons, closer into the 2,000 paragon mark, you can consider the choice of Unwavering Will. Unwavering Will giving us that additive damage increase, plus a nice toughness increase when we're standing still. Now, notably, we are not always standing still with this build. I mean, when you're corner stacking, you're still teleporting into the wall, and what happens when you teleport into the wall? Oftentimes, you're not staying still. You're having these little micro adjustments when you teleport into the corner or the wall that count as you moving. So oftentimes what will happen is you will refresh your safe passage, but Unwavering Will drop in that case. So you only get 3.5 seconds out of every 5 seconds of damage increase here, which is why I'm recommending you wait a little bit longer to tack this on. Blur is still an amazing passive in comparison, but this particular one, once you get a little bit higher level of toughness from those paragons and augmentations, can be a huge benefit in increasing your additive damage, remembering of course that we don't have Taeguk in this configuration, so we're just running Unwavering Will, Deflection, and the 3 skill damage affixes on the boots, source, and the helmet. So increasing the additive damage pool is going to be a nice offensive increase here, and something that's going to be hard to pass up indeed for that last passive slot. Now, the armor increase here is also being added in with your stone gauntlets. That is notable, but being a class that is really seeking out those increased armor gains, it's still of a very large benefit, and I think the toughness increase here is nice. I really enjoy the offensive and defensive nature of this passive, by the way. And then, of course, as mentioned earlier in our comparison with the Taeguk configuration, you can run Elemental Exposure. Even if you want to run with Stricken, I think this will still be an option, but it will require higher paragons to run with Stricken, for example. So something that we could do is, and it's something I looked into, is that we could technically run Spellsteal instead here. Spellsteal is additive on the black hole, would give us, instead of committing the increased percentage that we get from hitting black hole with density to our cold percent, our elemental percent, it would instead increase our damage increased by skills category. The increased duration, because Spellsteal is only 6 seconds duration, or 5 seconds. 5 seconds duration. Absolute Zero is 10 seconds. So even though the benefit from Absolute Zero is relatively slightly less, the increased duration that we have from Absolute Zero Black Hole is still worth more here. And Absolute Zero, quick reminder, is a static benefit. What I quickly tested on the PTR is that this spell, when you start casting a Twister, will take whatever cold percent you're at and then will apply that to the damage of that Twister stack. If the cold percent goes away, it's static, right? So it's whatever was happened at the point the Twister was cast. It's not dynamic. It doesn't depend. So even with that, having to deal with that, I kind of feel like the increased uptime here is a huge benefit. You can cast it way before your cold cycle, and you're going to benefit from it anyway. So it's not that hard to manage in the Rift. Let's see. Seeing as super high paragons are not the focus of this build, let's go back down to Earth. Let's take a look at the low paragon configurations where you might not have perfect gear. So some of the other things we can do, Squirt's Necklace, of course, you can run int here because, again, we're running the Absolute Zero, can easily scale up that cold damage, so you don't necessarily have to run the cold percentage on the amulet. Same deal with the pants. The pants are the Swampland Waders. these pants that we're going to try and get in an optimal scenario, they are a Witch Doctor item, so you might have to reroll them with bounties to get an ancient one that has cold percent and armor on it, and it's just a hassle sometimes to do that. So at lower paragons, before you've had a chance to do that, you can just slap on any old pair of set pants. Sets will be preferable if you don't have the Swampland Waders, because these at least give you a secondary, which you can perhaps put a little bit more pickup radius on to help you scoop up those globes. Quick mention though, the increased pickup radius that we get from Paragon now, 5 pickup radius, is going to be extremely helpful for this push build, scooping up the orbs as you, progression orbs as you go through the rift, especially since there is more of an elite focus with this particular push build. Earlier in Paragons, you're going to want to wear the Unity rather than wear the Halo of Greeny. That being said, if you do get like a primal Halo of Greeny, that's really good. You can put that on and cube the Unity instead. But the elite damage here is just going to be hugely advantageous, especially since we're not running area damage in this configuration. It's going to be extremely nice for bursting down those elites as you kite them to different corner stacking points throughout the rift, right? And let's go to our other configuration here, which is going to be a little bit easier to set up at those lower paragons, like 1200 paragon. Maybe you might have some ancient items that aren't perfectly rolled, but you can get them and possibly stack more vitality. So something you'll notice with the attack speed build here is that I've invested a ton of Paragon in vitality. So something you can do at lower paragons, because you don't have as much to work with, is just place that vitality on your gear instead, kind of like we did with the Meteor Shower build back in the day, is that Channeled Meteor Shower used to run these vitality affixes. So you run vitality on the weapon, on the gloves, and what we do with this is we're able to, you can see here, even though we're lower paragon, I was able to invest more into intelligence, which is going to be very nice at those lower paragons, just boosting your base toughness up through the all resistance that you gain 10% from int that you get there, and then also just increasing our damage through having higher main stat. That's the idea, is that this is just giving us more main stat by having these VIT rolls. And then on the ring, you can run average damage. So if you manage to get a really well-rolled Ancient Convention of Elements, put average damage on it, this would be the optimal there. Or if you get a nice one, either ancient or non-ancient, you can put int in that slot as well, this particular slot right here. Is we're going to run that lower breakpoint, the 1.54 attacks per second, with just the attack speed from Paragon. We drop the Enchantress in this configuration. That's another nicety, is that you get to run the Templar, which would give you the Inspire, giving you a little bit more resource, especially since it's a little bit harder to maintain the Aquila bonus through the Rift with the push configuration. That's going to be extremely nice. A few comments before we go on how you're going to have to push with this build and the types of risks you're going to need to get. You're going to need some rather interesting map types, can be a little bit more favorable. Some of the smaller closed-in maps like caves and at the lower end of pushing, you'll notice those will be a little bit more favorable, but as you push higher and higher, you will of course seek out those higher density type maps, those open maps that you can still corner stack. One of the ones that was good back in the day is Spire. Spire is extremely good for corner stacking because it's really easy to corner stack on those rounded columns in the Spire map. Especially, I had a little bit of trouble in the double festering that I had for my PTR push corner stacking at times. So one thing you can do against Rift Guardians is find 2 different corner stacking points, stack against one side, and then swap to the other one. This will allow you to proc your Halo of Carini. Against the Rift Guardian, you'll still have the toughness to keep up your squirts during your Convention of Elements cycle when the Rift Guardian is taking damage, and they will start to, the Stricken will start to stack up, and then you'll just decimate them, which is the idea. So, as far as Rift Guardians that are good for this build, anything that doesn't teleport. So, the Rhyme Ember, those type of Rift Guardians are not going to be good at all. You really want like a man carver type of Rift Guardian that just sits on top of you and is relatively easy to hit. Now, if you happen to get like a ranged Rift Guardian, like perhaps Iscandiel, you can shoot at them from range. So you keep up your Halo of your Storm Armor at range. You sacrifice your Audacity to in favor of just stacking Stricken against them. And what you do is you find like an alcove to place them in, back them into a corner, and you're not going to corner stack. You're just going to make sure they're in this tiny alcove and that you're channeling at them at range. This will allow you to keep up your Power of the Storm and stack Stricken against them and still kill them in a quick manner. Of course, Rift Guardians like Saxtus, Hamlin, Binder are going to be favorable because they have adds that can potentially proc keep up your Halo of Carini while still being able to corner stack against a corner stacking point and then decimate them. So in an optimal scenario, you would get one of those 3 Rift Guardians on a juicy map with a lot of density that you can pull in with your Rensselaer's Folly and just kind of decimate the Rift, right? So anyways, I hope you've enjoyed this solo pushing guide, this mini guide, if you will, to highlight the differences, and I hope I've done a good job at placing a casual focus on this highlight of this build. So anyway, thank you and take care.